This is the lecture for European history for Monday, the 12th of November, 2021. Tomorrow you will have your unit exam. It will cover everything we have done since August up to today's lecture. My advice is study for it. It is a big grade. My guess is it's going to be 100 to 150 questions. Be ready. Okay. Now, on to today.
I have a question for the general populace. Is anybody making a Quizlet?
I can try. There's a lot.
No. Okay, cool.
I can try though.
I wouldn't try, Jane. I'd leave her on her own.
Well, I was gonna make one for myself, but then I was like, that's a lot of time.
You know, if you're going to make one for yourself and other people want to benefit from your work, make them pay money.
Alright, I got you, Jane. I'll pay you $5.
Look, you do your negotiations elsewhere. Elsewhere. So, Francisco Pizarro has conquered Peru, Cortez has conquered Mexico, and Spain is now in charge of a massive empire. Now, first of all, Spain brings in the gold fleets because the Incas do literally have a mountain of gold. And so Spanish fleets transport the Incan gold up the Pacific coast to Panama, where they cross the mountains at the narrowest point, and then Spanish treasure fleets sail back through the Caribbean and across the Atlantic back to Cadiz in Spain. Others want the gold, or at least they want to prevent the gold from reaching Spain. So you have the rise of what are called privateers. And what a privateer is a pirate working for a particular country, particularly the British, although the French used them too. A privateer pirates enemy shipping. And because they are semi-official at most, governments can say, oh, I can't control these people. They may be from England, but they're not under my orders. A privateer gets letters of marque, which is government authorization to predate upon, if they're English, Spanish, and Portuguese shipping, if they're French, Spanish, Portuguese, and English shipping, and so on and so forth. Privateers are used right up until the end of the age of sail in the Napoleonic Wars. And Spanish treasure fleets are filled with treasure, and they make very good targets. A lot of legends exist about hidden treasure and pirate gold, as long as you're fully paying attention and are not looking at other things. So, with this, Spain is going to become even more of a superpower. Spain has already benefited in the early modern age by inheriting the advanced Arabic technology and civilization that Spain conquered from Granada. To this is now added the Reconquista Crusader zeal of Spanish troops, which make them very effective, and the wealth of the Americas, which allow the Spanish to rebuild their armies, rebuild their fleets in a modern fashion. Spain is truly a superpower. And in the late 1500s, briefly, Spain is unified with Portugal. So the Portuguese and Spanish empires now serve one master, which makes Spain even more powerful. But again, that doesn't last. Now, the system that is used to control the Indians in an area, in the areas where the Indians farmed, was called Encomedia. Encomedia. That's in your notes. It's based on an Aztec system of peasantry. Basically, what it requires of people, based on their birth is what feudalism in Europe requires of people who are born into the serf class or into the peasant class or as slaves. In Encomedia, those who farm give a proportion of their produce to the state. And the state uses that to feed the priests and the soldiers and the rest. They also owe labor when they're not farming, building roads, digging mines, that sort of thing. However, for those Indians that are Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, being locked onto farmland and forbidden to wander as their ancestors did is a particularly harsh thing. Many American Indians who are brought into captivity in this way wither and die in it. They do not adapt because they have no cultural precedent for this. They come from nomadic hunter-gatherers. As it was, it took a long time, thousands of years, for nomadic hunter-gatherers to truly embrace farming. To have it done all in one generation is just too much. So many American Indians who are brought under the Spanish system wither and die. And the Spaniards are setting up plantation agriculture. Who's going to grow their wheat or their cotton or their tobacco or their sugar, which becomes the super crop for a while? If not the Indians. I mean, the Indians are right there. They're natural labor, but they make lousy slaves because they die quickly. I know the Arabs have been raiding Africa for slaves for hundreds of years, about 1,000 years by this point. Let's see if we can do that. So Africa becomes a source of slaves, and these slaves are set up to work in the plantations. And Europeans, and I'll go into this more in more detail next unit, but Europeans work with Arab and native slave traders to capture slaves and bring them to the Americas. So everywhere from Point Barrow, Alaska, to Ushuaia, Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, which is from the northernmost to the southernmost permanent settlements on these American continents, has this American blend of races. The American blend of races is you have a certain proportion of American Indians or Native Americans. In the United States, it's a fairly small proportion, as it is in Canada. In Mexico, it's a much larger proportion. In the tropical regions between Mexico and Paraguay, Uruguay, and Argentina and Chile, it's a fairly large proportion. In those countries, it's a smaller proportion again. So you have a proportion of natives, Native Americans. You have another proportion of blacks brought in from Africa to work as slave labor. And these blacks, again, depending upon where and when. In Brazil and in the Caribbean islands, there are huge numbers of black people, African-descended Americans. They are not African Americans in the sense that they are not American citizens. It's funny. You get politically correct Americans going over to Britain, say, and they say, hey, look at those African Americans over there. What are they doing? And the Brits look at them. What are you talking about, mate? They're black. They're not African Americans. And it's just Americans get this drilled into them. Don't tell me they're not. No, they're black. They call themselves black. They don't call themselves, because they're not. If they're anything, they're Afro-Britons. So you've got a proportion of Native Americans, you've got a proportion of black Africans, and you've got a proportion of Europeans. Now, in Canada and the United States, the proportion of Europeans is large, as it is in Argentina and Chile and Uruguay. Everywhere else in the Americas, you've got a fairly small proportion of Europeans and a fairly large proportion of blacks or Indians or both. Some societies, like Mexico, try to blend the races. And you have most Mexicans having Indian and European and maybe a little African blood too. But depending upon where you're from in the Americas, the proportion is different. But all American societies have this blend. And it has to do with the history of the Spanish and Portuguese, yeah, because of Brazil, and the other plantations that are set up when Europeans colonize. They bring natives under their control. They bring in Africans and obviously European settlers. Yes.
It's funny because usually, like black people will get upset when people call them African Americans. People will say like it's not like they won't get upset, but they'll be like, "Wow, no, I'm American." Like I'm
It
not.
depends on who you talk to. The truth is, people getting offended about what other people say, unless somebody calls you a bleep. Come on, grow up. You know, we are not put on this earth to cater to your whims. I don't care what pronouns you use. I don't care what you prefer to be addressed as. I will address you as you appear to be. I'm not meaning any disrespect, but I really could care less what you identify as. I'm going to speak to you as you are. And I mean nothing bad by it. It's just what it is. If you want to present as something else, then present as something else. Maybe I won't notice. But don't play games where you look like a linebacker for the Los Angeles Rams or whatever, and call me ma'am! Like in that video a few years ago. You had a guy practically assault a cashier of all things because she called him sir, because he looked like a sir. In any event, the Columbian Exchange. Europe brings to the Americas gunpowder, horses, lots of disease, modern civilization. And the Americas contribute potatoes, which are a huge deal. Potatoes alone make the colonization of the Americas worthwhile. Because what potatoes are going to do, ladies, is they are going to end the cycle of hunger that has plagued European civilization since its beginning. Because potatoes are more dowdy and tough than wheat. You also get tobacco from the Americas. And smoky, good, up until the 1960s. More and more people took the tobacco from Americas and smoked it in pipe form or cigar form or cigarette form eventually. We don't smoke as much as we used to. But it is an American product. Also, there's a particular kind of disease, certain venereal diseases that come from the Americas to Europe, such as syphilis. So there is an exchange back to Europe in terms of this of disease. So you should be aware of that. Okay. I'll talk about mercantilism next unit. Talk about Vespucci. You will note a large area of land in the southern hemisphere of a lot of these maps because they believe that the northern and southern hemisphere needed to have proportionate land to water ratios. They do not. The southern hemisphere is largely water compared to the northern hemisphere, which has much more land. But they didn't know that. They hadn't charted certain things yet. Now, the scientific revolution is based on the revival of Aristotelian philosophy. The philosophies of Aristotle involve pulling away from theoretical visualization a la Platonic archetypes, the visualized perfect forms of Plato, and instead looking into observable conclusions, which is what Aristotle recommends. The scientific method is nothing more than applied Aristotelian philosophy. If you wonder about something, make a hypothesis. Design experiments to test that hypothesis. Go through the experiments and see where the data leads you, and theorize based on where the data goes, until something better comes along, a better set of experiments, a better set of conclusions. So, the applied Aristotelian philosophy is the scientific method. You also have certain logic tools like Occam's razor. Occam's razor. Many of you know what that is. We've talked about this. Occam's razor. Every educated person should know what Occam's razor is. Yes?
Isn't it like the simplest solution is all?
Yes. Yes. Given two solutions, the simplest is probably the most likely. It's simply a logic tool. We're going to apply it to the universe. So, what people have believed up until this point, who are educated, is you've got the round Earth with the continents. Europe, there's Asia, there's the Americas, there's the Earth. And it's round. And orbiting around the Earth, you've got Sun and the Moon. And they travel around in their orbital paths. The Moon is slightly closer than the Sun because of eclipses. Obviously, what I should do is I should have the North Pole here at the center, but who cares? So we're shifting the Earth 90 degrees. Now, beyond the Sun and the Moon are a variety of planets. And they all do something like this. Let me explain what that is. In the heavens, there are the fixed stars, which is called the crystal sphere of heaven. These fixed stars don't move. They move as the seasons move, but they don't change position. Not visibly, not quickly. So the Big Dipper is the Big Dipper, Orion is Orion, Taurus the Bull is Taurus the Bull, and so forth. But then you've got Mercury or Jupiter, Venus or Saturn or Mars. And they move across the night sky in apparently reasonable order, every night going a little ahead. And then for reasons unknown, they go back a little ways. It's called retrograde. And then they go forward again. And it's not even a regular retrograde, it's just and so forth. What are these cards that everyone is using?
They're paper.
Yeah,
Could it possibly be for ancient literature?
Why would you think that?
I don't know, because somebody mentioned it earlier. In any event, why would a planet do that? Go forward, 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 speed up, go back, forward, forward, speed up, go back, forward, go back, then speed up. It's inconsistent, but why? Europeans wondered this. And what they came up with was a model of the solar system called an orrery. And an orrery, which I will write for you, O-R-R-E-R-Y, is a physical model of the solar system with planets and gears and so forth. Please wait. So, okay. Do you know how complicated they had to make it so that the planetary retrograde could be taken into account? You've got to have circles, because circles are perfect forms, and the assumption is everything above is perfect, everything below is imperfect. So what you've got to have is a gear with a gear in it, with a gear on top of it that orbits around, in order to get a planet to do what it's supposed to do on its fixed orbit. So you need 3 or 4 gears to place Jupiter. Clearly, Venus and Mars, well, Venus and Mercury, are close to the Sun, so sometimes they have Venus and Mars and Mercury orbiting the Sun. And the rest of the planets, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, orbiting the Earth, like everything else does. Now, in this geocentric model, the Earth is at the center. And the cosmology that grew up besides Christianity gets to continue. So what's the deal with that? Well, where's hell? Down. Bowels of the earth. Where's heaven? Up. Beyond the crystal sphere. Starlight is the light of heaven peeking through a solid crystalline sphere that is the edge of the world. The world, the sun, the moon, the planets, the stars. Starlight is heavenly light. So, heaven, hell, us. in the middle of heaven and hell, Middle Earth. This works, sort of. And then, let's see, Copernicus advocates this, who is a Pole. He's a Polish astronomer. Nicholas Copernicus is his Latinized name. And Copernicus says, no, this is all wrong. We are complicating what is a very simple model. And that simple model is heliocentric. Heliocentric? That's crazy nuts. What do you mean heliocentric? Well, Copernicus posits that there is the sun, the heart of our system, and that there are a series of planets orbiting the sun, these are the planets. And then beyond that, you've got the stars and so on and so forth. But instead of it being a crystalline sphere, the stars are merely distant suns. You see, the notion is that retrograde can be explained if the Earth is merely one planet among many, orbited by the moon, of course, that orbits the sun. And so Mercury and Venus and the other planetary motions that we can observe with the naked eye, including Jupiter and Saturn, are a result of us all orbiting around the sun. In other words, the Earth is simply a planet. Now, the Copernican model comes along during the midst of the wars of religion. And for some reason, the church does not want one more thing for people to question about the nature of reality. So, Copernicus's ideas are disgraced and disputed. And his ideas, just for the record, are heliocentric model. Helios being a Greek word for the sun. Okay. Kepler comes along and argues that the minor mathematical problems that prevent Copernicus's model from being accepted are a result that the orbits are not perfectly circular. They don't have to be perfectly circular. They don't have to be perfect because the notion of perfection above might be wrong. In fact, the orbits are elliptical. Elliptical, oval, irregular. And once you take into account the possibility of elliptical orbits, heliocentric model makes much more mathematical sense. Now we come to Galileo Galilei, a pervert. Because Galileo develops what people have been using for hundreds of years, a telescope. But everyone knows that decent folk use telescopes to spy on their neighbors, for espionage, and to look for distant ships at sea, both to plan your business and for warship type development. Spotting enemy warships before they get too close so you can run or attack. But this perv aims his telescope up God's skirts. He looks at the moon and sees irregularities there. Moon's supposed to be perfect. It's not. He looks at Jupiter and sees moons around Jupiter. How can there be moons around Jupiter unless Jupiter's just another planet? He sees rings around Saturn. So Galileo sees all of these things. And he starts writing about it in Italian as well as Latin. And the church comes to him and says quietly, "El Signore Galilei." His name is Galileo Galilei. We understand what you're doing. We actually have Jesuit astronomers that can even confirm some of your theories. But what you're doing is sowing discord at a time when the world is racked by religious doubt and war. Write in Latin. Write to scholars. Talk about this with scholars in Latin. and we will support what you're doing. Does this sound familiar? Because it's basically the same thing that the church advocated Luther do. But Galileo, like Luther, is a rather impatient, intemperate fellow. And he says, but it's the truth! So he then, because that's my Italian impression, he then writes a book called A System of the Discourse on the Three Universal Systems. And in that discourse, there are three characters. There's a questioner who's going to ask all the questions. There is a heliocentric person who's very smart and wise, and he's clearly Galileo. And then there's the third character, Simplicio. Simplicio means the stupid one. And Simplicio is going to argue the geocentric model. So Galileo not only doesn't quiet his stuff, he publishes a major book that people can read on the street. And in it, he puts the church's position and the position of classical astronomy into the hands of the stupid guy. He has shown the implements of torture by the Holy Inquisition. And he recants. I'm sorry, I was wrong. Don't believe what I said. Now, to this day, in absolutely every single history of science class I have ever taken, the story of Galileo is used to tell you how you got to choose between faith and science, because faith is a bunch of dogmatic, ignorant, violent jerks, and science are the heroes of truth. Just look at poor Galileo. He had to recant his truth, otherwise tortured. Eventually, he ended up being tortured. He didn't shut up. Why? Well, that's the way scientists often see it. I have a somewhat different opinion. I have the same thoughts on Luther. Yes, Galileo discovered things that were true, as far as he could determine. But Galileo took no account of the effects that his truth would have on society. He was not willing to listen to the church or anyone who argued that at this moment, given the amount of blood that's being shed over Catholicism versus Protestantism versus Reformed Christianity, that introducing a basic fundamental doubt into the question of what's in the sky and what's on the ground, are we the only world, that might actually make things worse, didn't matter to him. Galileo just went through like a bull in a china closet, and his attitude resulted in the conflict that the church gave him. Who's right? I don't know. You decide. Was Galileo's vision important? Yes, of course. But in a world that's ripping itself apart, perhaps a degree of discretion might not have been a bad idea. Again, Jesuit astronomers had confirmed a lot of what Galileo was saying. But they weren't shouting it to the high heavens because it would create problems. In the end, Isaac Newton, Sir Isaac Newton, the Briton, the Englishman, the only scientist to be buried with honors in Westminster Abbey. Sir Isaac Newton is going to systematize all of these discoveries and go beyond them. He's going to come up with laws of motion, laws of hydrodynamics, laws of thermodynamics. An object once in motion tends to remain in motion unless another force acts upon it. An object at rest tends to remain at rest unless another force acts on it. Now, Newton views gravity as an attractive force. The classic image of Newton is he's dozing under an apple tree, and kabam-pow, an apple hits him in the noggin. And that apple reminds him that gravity is a thing. So Newtonian physics is going to be developed as a basis for understanding our world. You know something? It works. If you're looking at human senses, the human ability to perceive reality, our sense of time and space, as long as you don't go too deep into the heavens or too small into atomic physics, Newtonian physics is perfectly reasonable to explain almost everything that we can discern. It's because Einstein went super big into astronomy and Niels Bohr went super small into quantum mechanics that Newtonian physics breaks down, and you need a new theory, general theories of relativity, special theories of relativity, and ideas in relation to subatomic theory. Yes?
This was a while ago when you were talking about the planets going backwards.
Yep.
So it reminded me, this morning, we were on our way to school, and we were about to turn, go into the left lane thing,
Yeah.
And this semi-truck's going right. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we were pulling up, and the semi-truck is just, almost hitting the guys in the other lane going straight. And so we're just doing this wide turn thing. And he probably came 3 inches from hitting us. And my mom was, freaking out because she, dropped the phone. Yeah.
Well, A, should she have been on the phone while driving?
No, I was on the phone.
Oh, you were on the
phone. I
phone.
had given it to her to show
Okay.
her. And then,
Is that what happened to your phone?
No.
Okay.
Titan tried to fix it, and then I threw it.
Okay. As long as it's a sensible story.
Yeah.
Sometimes people drive like idiots. I was almost killed by a semi-truck once. We were in an ice storm, and I was driving along a road a lot like 95, and a truck pulls out in the middle of the road and doesn't turn his lights on until he's out in the road. He had just woken up. He was at a siding where he slept. And so I hit the back of the cab with the front of my Chevy, and it split the engine block and came within 3 feet of the passenger compartment. I was very lucky not to die. I saw my life pass before my eyes, and I was covered in gas. Luckily, I didn't light up a cigarette. I smoked at that time. I was thinking, I probably should. And the cop who came by said, "Don't you dare. You're covered in gas." I said, "Oh, I didn't know. I didn't know." Quickly, yeah.
There have been so many semi-truck accidents lately. There was one on 95.
Yeah.
It rolled garbage was everywhere. Stuff was on fire. And then
Well, you want good truck drivers. The Teamsters and the trucking industry, it's just everything is so messed up today that maybe you have people behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler who don't know what they're doing as well. That's scary. That's scary. The only thing scarier would be somebody saying, "Oh yeah, we should automate them all." No. We don't do that. Okay. So, Isaac Newton systematizes everything. Oh, one other guy, Tycho Brahe. Tycho Brahe is a Dutch astronomer, and he discovers, among other things, the Tycho crater on the moon, which is one of the biggest craters, one of the most dramatic craters on the moon, because it has a massive dispersion pattern. But Tycho, what stands out in me is he got into a bar fight, and somebody bit off his nose.
Oh.
So he, for the rest of his life, wore a copper nose to cover, and they called him Old Copper Nose.
Who's the guy who bit off that guy's ear?
That's Van Gogh. He cut his own ear off.
No. In boxing. What's his name?
In what?
Boxing. In MMA?
Oh, that's Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Blaise Pascal tries to harmonize science and religion, saying that you can be religious and still be a seeker of knowledge, that they are different things. So you should know him. And if it ain't Baroque, don't fix it. Art that's Baroque is very ornate, and music that's Baroque is also very ornate. Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, is Baroque music. Trying to remember some painters who are Baroque in art. But Baroque art and Baroque architecture is impossible to mistake for anything else because everything is so detailed. Tiny little details everywhere. Beautiful stuff. So, what I'm going to do now is show you a couple of things that relate to what we did today. So, with those who are by the windows, please close the shades and shut the fan off. And I will pause the video. Because God forbid YouTube thinks I'm trying to steal someone else's copyright.
I think you are.
Oh, only in spirit.
Did you see what happened at the Travis Scott concert?
Yeah, did you see how many people died? 8 people died.
Yeah, because somebody
They got
was,
suffocated,
a false fire,
It's a human mosh pit.
and 300 people got injured.
Injured.
Wait, did somebody shed fire?
I don't know exactly what happened.
Everyone was so tightly packed together, like a bunch of
Okay, yeah, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
We had people die in Connecticut in the late 70s, and we didn't have open seating concerts, I think, ever again in Connecticut, because people were crowding. And no, people die in cases like that. That's horrific. Lights, please.
There were so many people in small space, suffocated.
Should I turn that off?